Mark Zuckerberg, the most powerful man in social media, the controversial CEO of Facebook who everyone loves to hate. But what's there not to like? He created a platform that billions of people use every single day. His empire doesn't just include Facebook, but Instagram, WhatsApp, and even virtual reality through Oculus. Zuckerberg has achieved more before the age of 40 than most people do in an entire lifetime. So how exactly did he do it? How did someone straight out of Harvard go from zero to hero? Let's find out. Mark Elliott Zuckerberg was born in Dobbs Ferry, New York on May 14, 1984. His father, Edward, worked as a dentist while his mother, Karen, was a psychiatrist. Mark had two sisters, both of whom were older than him. They would often tease him because of his weight, which made Mark feel very insecure growing up. And this insecurity would follow him into adulthood. Zuckerberg was an intelligent kid from a very young age. At age 10, he taught himself how to program by reading a computer science book. At 12, he developed an interest in classical music after getting an Atari Punk console. And at 13, he was already trying to start his first business by selling pizza door to door. He wasn't your typical middle schooler. When Mark was 14, his father bought him a computer, and that was when everything changed. By the time he was 16, he had become an expert in Microsoft Office and was even hired by his dad to manage the Office network. After graduating from high school, Zuckerberg enrolled at Harvard University to study psychology and hoped to join the Peace Corps after graduation. However, he soon realized that studying wasn't easy and dropped out after just 2 weeks. Zuckerberg was far from being a nerd. He was a popular guy who knew how to throw a party. But as the saying goes, good grades don't always mean good luck. While Zuckerberg was doing well socially, he was doing terribly academically. He barely managed to pass his classes and began to feel miserable. He soon became depressed and began missing classes. He started going to frat parties every night to take his mind off things, which only made his grades drop further. Then, one fateful night, he met this girl named Erica and asked her out. She turned him down, saying she didn't date nerds. That was the wake-up call Zuckerberg needed. He realized that he was wasting his life away and needed to change something. That's when he decided to transfer to a different university where he could focus on academics rather than partying. At the beginning of his second semester at college, Zuckerberg registered for a class called Introduction to Computer Science. He had no idea that this class would change his life forever. It was taught by a professor named Harry Shapiro, who was considered the best teacher on campus. By the end of the class, Zuckerberg had fallen in love with programming. He joined a group called the Harvard Connection, which helped students get connected with each other. The group gave him the idea of FaceMash, a website that would allow students to rate the hotness of their peers. He used stolen Facebook photos and created an algorithm to match students with similar interests. It went viral within the university and soon racked up over 20,000 users. But Zuckerberg's success was short-lived. The dean of Harvard College found out about FaceMash and shut it down. Even though FaceMash was a huge success, Zuckerberg knew he couldn't keep doing what he was doing. If he wanted to make something of himself, he needed to get a real job. So during summer break, he took an internship at a startup called Microsoft. There, he met some of the brightest minds in the industry and learned a lot about programming. But after the internship ended, he went back to Harvard and abandoned his studies once again. Instead of focusing on his classes, he spent all his time working on new projects, trying to come up with something that would change the world. That's when he met Eduardo Saverin, Andrew McCollum, Dustin Moskovitz, and Chris Hughes. Together, they came up with the idea of Facebook. The name originally came from the Latin word facere, which means to make. They wanted to create a website that would help students make new friends. Zuckerberg wanted to call it Facebook, since it would be a place where people could share their face or faces. They built the initial version of the site in Zuckerberg's dorm room using PHP and It wasn't anything special, but they planned to expand it in the future. They made the site exclusive to Harvard students so that they could test it out before releasing it to the public. Soon enough, over half of all Harvard students had signed up, but it wasn't long before the media found out about it and started calling it the Facebook. This gave Zuckerberg and his team the idea of expanding the platform to other universities. They allowed students from 8 neighboring schools to join, but they soon realized that they needed more than just students. If they wanted to grow, they needed to attract adults as well. By the end of 2004, Facebook had 1 million users and was the fastest growing website in history. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Zuckerberg had been spending money like crazy, and the company was in dire need of funding. In order to save the company, Zuckerberg and his partners agreed to sell a 50% stake in the company to investors for $45 million. The investment gave them enough money to keep the lights on, but it also brought a lot of problems. Investors started pressuring Zuckerberg to make the site more profitable. But he didn't know how to do that, so he turned to Sheryl Sandberg, the CFO of Google, for help. Sandberg was impressed by the site and agreed to join Facebook as coup. She helped Zuckerberg implement changes that made the site more profitable. In 2007, Facebook introduced advertising, which turned out to be extremely profitable. Against them. Governments started regulating Facebook more closely and the public started hating Zuckerberg. But none of this mattered to Facebook's bottom line. The company continued to grow and eventually became a $1 trillion company. Zuckerberg is now the most powerful man in social media, and his empire continues to grow. But he hasn't been able to shake off the negative publicity. Many people still hate him and believe that he's a fraud. But that doesn't bother Zuckerberg anymore. He knows that he's created something that the world loves, whether they admit it or not. Many people see Zuckerberg as a villain, but we have to admit that he's a brilliant programmer and entrepreneur. He saw a problem and created a solution. He took risks and bet everything on his ideas. He wasn't afraid to fail, and when he did fail, he picked himself up and started again. That's the kind of determination and resilience that we all need to learn from. But what about his flaw? He was known for being arrogant and insensitive. He was willing to sacrifice his users' privacy for profit, and he was even accused of stealing. It's important to remember that he's just a human being. He's not perfect, and he's made mistakes in the past. But that doesn't mean that he's a bad person. We all make mistakes, and it's up to us to learn from them and move on. So what can we learn from the story of Mark Zuckerberg? Well, firstly, we need to embrace change. Change can be scary, but it's also necessary for growth. Zuckerberg was scared to leave his comfort zone, but he did it anyway, and it paid off. Secondly, we need to take risks. Life is full of risks, and we can't be afraid to take them. Zuckerberg took a big risk when he dropped out of college, but it paid off. Finally, we need to learn from our mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, but it's up to us to learn from them and move on. Zuckerberg made some mistakes along the way, but he learned from them and became a better person because of it. What do you think about Zuckerberg? Do you love him or hate him? Let us know in the comments below.